Morning, I'm Dan Wolf. Thanks for joining us. After years of concern about public safety in downtown Duluth, City Council tonight voted on upgrading security and basically closing off a downtown parking ramp. Northern News Now's Larissa Millis spoke with city leaders about the problem and how this proposal could make things safer.
Duluth's Tech Village parking ramp is used by a lot of people who work downtown, many of whom have raised concerns over the ramp's safety. They report a large amount of needles laying around and often being verbally harassed by people not using the ramp for its intended purposes.
We've seen a number of different things and people bringing up concerns about illegal activity. We've had the police department involved. We've had security involved. And so I think this is really something that would take it to the next step.
That next step, a $165,000 investment in an access control system, which uses a variety of security tools like cameras, ID cards, and doors to control the entry and exit of vehicles into a parking space, making it easier to keep people out of the garages who've not paid for their space.
And this is something for the benefit of people who park there, for the people who work downtown, and really have expectations of when they are paying for parking in a ramp in a facility, that there are expectations of safety that go along with that.
Councilors debated that investment Monday night, with some raising concerns this move would further make things difficult for unhoused people seeking shelter in the ramp.
There's a lot of safety concerns, as well as concerns for folks that have behavior or mental health issues or addictions that have been kind of using that space in a way that's not productive for them. And so to be able to get them access to services, it's best that we start implementing some controls on those public ramps.
Council Vice President Roz Randorf, who represents the downtown area, says this investment would actually help people experiencing homelessness.
It's really just a small piece of a greater project we've been working on through the task force and through all of the investments we've made. This is a fraction of the $23 million that we're making in housing, in $1.8 million in community crisis response.
The motion passed unanimously Monday night. In Duluth, Larissa Millis, Northern News Now.
And the system will be installed this spring. As of right now, due to cost, the Tech Village ramp is going to be the only one that will be getting that security upgrade.